Welcome to Trash Talk MMA, the number one podcast for news and insight that matters in the world of mixed martial arts. Brought to you live and unfiltered from all four corners of the globe by MMA aficionado, Antoine Peltier.
Yo, welcome to the Trash Talk MMA podcast, episode 8. I'm your host, Antoine Peltier, coming to you live from Phuket, Thailand. Today's episode, we're going to talk about the results of UFC Fight Night 60 last weekend that featured a welterweight bout between Benson Henderson and Brandon Thatch. And from there, we will seg into a bit of a preview for UFC Fight Night 61 coming up this Saturday, which features a heavyweight main event between Antonio Bigfoot Silva and Frank Mir. So looking back at UFC Fight Night 60 from this past weekend, in the main event, Ben Henderson won his welterweight debut against a very tough and violent Brandon Thatch by rear naked choke in the fourth round. I think this fight saved the card. I think Ben Henderson saved the card. He's not always been in my good books. I don't think he's always been in everyone's good books. And I think he made a lot of new fans and a lot of new friends with the performance that he put on. He really fought like a champ. He was patient. He was tactical. He was actually outstriking Thatch on the feet. It was impressive to see how swollen up and bruised Thatch's eyes were, and just how methodical Benson Henderson was starting in round 2 of getting Thatch to the ground, going for submissions, not being able to get it, but refusing to lose at that game, get him back down in the fourth, and land a very, very impressive rear naked choke victory. Yeah, Ben Henderson looked great. Thatch came out strong in the first. I think a lot of people are talking about how Henderson survived an onslaught. I don't think Thatch really brought an onslaught like he has in his previous UFC fights that have all of his fights before this, except for one split decision loss, had ended with him winning by stoppage in the first round. But Thatch never really poured it on to the same degree as he has in his 2 previous UFC contests. And Henderson was, he was elusive and able to really weather whatever the initial first storm was brought to him. Thatch definitely pushed the pace. He was always advancing, always being aggressive, but never really came forward with the flurries that we've seen him come with before. And it was cool to see Henderson, when he won, acknowledge the size difference, and also that he was fighting at altitude, and that even despite his legendary cardio and legendary fitness level, that he went through quite a war. So bravo to Henderson. Great to see him get that type of victory after which I believe he was robbed in his loss in his previous fight to Donald Cerrone. So great to see him back in the win column and get a stoppage victory in his debut at welterweight. I don't think anyone expected that. And like I said, he made a lot of new fans, and it'll be interesting to see where he goes from there. If he drops down to lightweight or if he continues at welterweight, frankly, I'd like to see him continue at welterweight. It's just a breath of fresh air. Maybe he can put on some muscle, put on a bit of size, and we'll see the types of guys he can beat at that weight class. I mean, the guy's a damn good fighter. You really can't take that away from him. He's had a lot of decision wins at lightweight that people weren't too much a fan of, but I think losing a tough decision to Cerrone like that probably lit quite the fire under him. To take the fight like he did on short notice at altitude after and against a tough guy like Thatch really shows a big pair of balls on Henderson. So I'm a renewed fan. I haven't been a fan of Henderson since he was in the WEC, where he put on some incredible fights there. But I'm looking forward to seeing his next matchup and to see what weight class he's going to fight at and who they'll put him against. In the co-main event, Max Holloway defeated Cole Miller with a dominant unanimous decision. Holloway looked great. He was aggressive, always moving forward, throwing a lot of clean strikes, keeping switching up his attack, a lot of different varieties in the strikes he was throwing. I think he got Miller frustrated very quickly, and on top of it, when he landed that headbutt, obviously accidental, that really obviously threw Miller off. It seems like he couldn't refocus after that. There was even the claims that he hit him with a second headbutt. I think from the reviews of that or the replays of it, that there wasn't a second headbutt. He was leaning in, brushing up against. So, it's interesting to see how how psychological that game can be played, and how well Holloway played it. And he's now being rewarded with first of all, with now being a top 10 featherweight in the UFC and getting a fight against the awesome Cub Swanson. So that's going to be a heck of a fight. I think those guys kind of have similar builds and similar aggressive, varied attack styles. So I'm looking forward to seeing Holloway against Cub Swanson. It's going to be hard to bet against Cub, especially coming off that loss to Edgar, which he's going to want to put behind him. But Holloway's confident. He didn't show any fear against Cole Miller. I like Cole Miller. He's a tough dude, and he's been out for a while, and I think he needed to get back in the cage to get some of the ring rust off, and hopefully we'll see him back in there soon and get a win. In the fourth bout of the night, Neil Manny, who was on a 5-fight win streak with all those wins coming in 2015, faced Kiichi Kunimoto in a welterweight clash, and Kunimoto was also on a 7-fight win streak. Manny looked incredible, man. I thought he made great use of his length, of his reach. He was throwing very fast, crisp, straight punches. He dominated in the clinch. He got the takedowns, and ultimately ended up winning by submission. And I think he really broke Kunimoto down, and that was a classic example of, I think, a fighter just looking for a way out. I think at the start of the third, Manny had a really easy takedown to get Kunimoto down, and he worked his back a bit, and then it looked like Kunimoto just wanted out of there, didn't want any more of the fight, and pretty much let Manny choke him out. So I think Manny's a great addition to the welterweight division. He's humble, he's very fast, he's a talented guy, and he's on a great streak, a 6-fight win streak now. Interestingly enough, with the ratings that came out this week, he's still not in the top 15 of the welterweight division, but that's a tough list, man. That is a very, very, very stacked division, and even when you start getting outside of the top 10, you look at the guys that are there, they deserve to be there. I think Gunnar Nelson is 15th. That could make for a potentially interesting fight for Manny next. Or, while not within the top 15, a fight with Jordan Mean, who we saw just lose a fight that he was clearly winning in the first round against Thiago Alves. I think that could be a really, really fun fight and a great test for both of those men to see if they can break into the top 15. In any case, Manny got performance of the night, which was very well deserved. And on that note as well, Henderson and Brandon Thatch got fight of the night, and I think that was very well deserved as well. In what's probably the UFC's thinnest male division, the flyweight division, in the opening bout of the main card, Ray Borg defeated Chris Kaleles by submission in the third round. Chris was a tough guy, tough Canadian fighter, but he seemed outmatched pretty much from the start. He was on defense the entire time, and Borg just plowed into him, kept hammering away on him. And got the submission in the third round, and as well as the performance of the night. What was pretty curious is how the number 9 and number 11 ranked Zach Makovsky and Tim Elliott, also in the flyweight division, Makovsky winning that fight by unanimous decision. They weren't on the made card, so I'm not really sure what the UFC's ploy was there to put Borg versus Chris on the main card, but keep these 2 ranked fighters below. I don't know, maybe it was to give a little bit more oomph to some prelims that didn't really have any. So the flyweight contenders keep coming in, but there's really nobody. Nobody's looking like they're gonna even remotely scratch the surface of the talent that Demetrius Johnson is showing as the champion in the flyweight division. So with the notable bouts from UFC Fight Night 60 covered, I'd like to move on to a preview of UFC Fight Night 61, which features a main event between Antonio Bigfoot Silva and Frank Mir. So this card is taking place in Brazil. The UFC has been putting on a ton of fights in Brazil. It's good to see because, that's one of the meccas of MMA in the world, and they have fantastic fans, and every single time the places are sold out from the first fight to the last. It's nice to see them, the venue populated by fans from the very beginning. It really shows how supportive they are of their fighters. This event will actually be the first one that the UFC has hosted in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. A little bit of background on the event. A light heavyweight bout between Rashad Evans and Glover Teixeira was expected to serve as the event headliner. However, on January 7th, Teixeira was forced out of the bout as his knee, injured in his last fight, was slow to heal, and he was unable to resume the proper training to prepare for the fight in that time frame. Evans is expected to be rebooked at a different event with possibly a new opponent, except now it's been announced by Rashad himself that he had to undergo another knee surgery, I believe, and will be out for another 6 to 7 months. So both Teixeira, both Evans out with knee issues. Wish them the best. Hopefully they recover quickly. Those injuries suck. And, both guys are really sorely missing from the light heavyweight division, which is pretty thin right now as it is too. So wish them the best and hope we get to see them back in the cage soon. So the heavyweight bout between Antonio Silva and Frank Mir that's taking place this Saturday was actually previously scheduled for UFC 184, which will now take place, I believe, a week after this event. So that fight got pulled a week forward to make sure that there was a compelling main event for this UFC Fight Night 61 in Brazil. As with the UFC Fight Night 60 card last weekend, 61 is another card very, very low on star power. Of the 24 fighters competing on the card, 6 of them don't have Wikipedia entries. But hey, we've come to expect this from these fight nights in Brazil, where the fans come out regardless and cheer, and generally the fighters put on great violent fights. So hey, it's all good. There's going to be a bunch of fighters I'm not going to talk about because, again, they're just not really relevant. But I'll be tuning in and watching the card from top to bottom as, Brazilians always bring it, especially when they're at home. They always feel they have a lot to prove in front of their hometown fans. So make sure you watch the card from top to bottom or you'll probably miss a few really exceptional barn burners. So with all due respect to all the fighters on the card, and to not sound too much like a jerk, the first 10 fights are all pretty much inconsequential in the grand scheme of things as far as rankings go and meaningful fights as far as divisions go. Even the hardcore MMA fans really won't recognize these fighters in the street. There's a few lower ranked fighters like Jessica Andrade and Rustam Khabilov and also Cesar Ferreira, who won Tough Brazil, but it's all very, very thin. So I'm going to skip straight away to the co-main event, which features a lightweight fight between the number 6 rated Edson Barbosa and number 12 rated Michael Johnson. Barbosa is 15-2. His only losses were a shocking loss to Jamie Varner and a quick and somewhat shocking loss to Donald Cerrone. The loss to Cerrone is obviously not shocking unto itself. Many fighters have fallen in front of Donald, but I think everybody expected a better performance out of Barbosa. He got a bit caught. I believe he got submission pretty quickly after taking a shot. He's been quoted as saying that that's a rematch that he'd like to get, and maybe it will be if he's able to win this fight, and if Cerrone were to lose his next fight against the number 2 rated Khabib. In his last fight, Barbosa decisioned Bobby Green, who's been a very good fighter of late and always very tough. And before that, he TKO'd Evan Dunham, again, a fighter who always brings it and very difficult to finish. Barbosa's a beast. He's got incredible kicks. Right now, he's got great confidence. I love his stand-up. It's unpredictable. He's got so many varied attacks. He's great with the leg kicks. I believe he's the only fighter in the UFC to have 2 stoppages by leg kick TKO. So I think it's pretty safe to say that we'll be seeing Barbosa try to go for the KO. His opponent, Michael Johnson, is no joke either. MJ is 3-0 with a decision win over Melvin Gillard and a very dominant decision over the very tough Joe Lozon. And he landed a vicious KO over the very durable Gleison Tibau. It's very rare that you see Tibau get stopped. Michael Johnson also holds impressive wins. I think he has a KO win over Danny Castillo and a win over Tony Ferguson and Shane Roller. Again, both fighters who are no jokes. Of interesting note, Johnson hasn't fought in over a year due to being arrested for a domestic dispute charge. So it'll be interesting to see if he comes in with any ring rust. Barbosa's been quite active of late, and I think he's enjoying being active. And due to this fact, I think I'm going to pick Barbosa in this fight. I think that he's just got a tremendous amount of momentum right now. He's on a tear. He's been looking great, and he's going to be fighting at home. But Michael Johnson is no joke, and he's on a 3-fight win streak over great fighters, so it wouldn't be surprising at all to see him get a big upset. This brings us to the main event of the night, which is a heavyweight contest between the number 8 ranked Antonio Bigfoot Silva and number 13 ranked Frank Mir. Bigfoot is 2-5 in his last 7 fights and hasn't won since a monstrous KO over Overeem over 2 years ago. Unfortunately, he got smashed quickly and brutally by Arlovsky in his last fight. Before that, he had an amazing war with Mark Hunt, but then got popped for elevated levels of testosterone, and he was TKO'd by Cain Velasquez before that. So Bigfoot has definitely seen better days, but for some reason, I still feel like he shows more promise than Frank Mir coming into this matchup. Just based on his youth and the fact that he hasn't been battered in quite the same ways like Frank Mir was by Brock Lesnar or by Junior Dos Santos or by Shane Carwin. That being said, Bigfoot has been through some serious wars of late. That fight with Mark Hunt was something insane, and his losses to Cain weren't pretty to watch either. His opponent, Frank Mir, is 0-4. So, I think this is the first time that Frank Mir has been on a 4-fight losing streak. He lost a decision to Overeem. He was TKO'd by Josh Barnett. He lost a decision to Daniel Cormier and was also TKO'd quite violently by Junior Dos Santos. Frank Mir's last win was in December of 2011 against Big Nog, and for anybody who witnessed that fight live, it certainly was an impressive win where he was the first man to have he just basically ripped Big Nog's arm out of its socket. I think he twisted it so badly in a Kimura that he said that the bones in Big Nog's arm sounded like someone was crushing a bag of potato chips. So I can imagine that that's something that probably keeps even Frank Mir himself up at night, and certainly keeps Big Nog up at night. So Frank Mir was quoted recently as saying his future in MMA as a fighter depends on his performance and not the result of this fight. But I don't think he truly believes that, and I don't think anyone else really believes that. Fringe top 15 fighter in the UFC heavyweight division. In my opinion, Mir has to win this fight, or he drops out of the top 15. And where does that leave him? Guys like him, they're legends. He's fought nothing but top competition. We can say what we want about him. I've often said a few sly remarks about Frank Mir. But come on, the guy's he's been around forever. He's fought everybody. He's a multiple-time champ. He holds numerous impressive records in the UFC, and we don't want to see him fighting tomato cans. Mir is either fighting top competition or not fighting at all, and I don't think he sees it really any other way. In his mind, if he believes that if he just puts on a good performance and he can keep fighting, I don't think that's going to play out that way. It's an interesting matchup, though, Frank Mir versus Bigfoot. They're both good grapplers. Mir is obviously superior on the ground, but Bigfoot's not afraid to be there. I think Mir has the better jiu-jitsu, whereas Bigfoot has the better ground and pound. I think Mir has, on the feet, better boxing, but Silva might definitely has more power and perhaps better speed with his youth. Size is always an issue for Bigfoot's opponent. The guy's just massive. He gets on top of you. It's extremely difficult to do anything about it. Just ask Fedor about that one. But Mir is extremely comfy on the ground, and he's one of the rare heavyweight fighters who's won a lot of fights off his back. So I think even if it goes to the ground, as long as Mir can control the movement and the body of Bigfoot, that he has a chance of even submitting him down there. Ultimately, I think Mir's career is coming to an end, whereas Bigfoot still has more fights ahead of him. He's just younger, taking less beatings, been around less time, and I think Bigfoot's going to take this one, probably by ground and pound, by TKO. So if this is the last time that we see Frank Mir, God bless him, man. So many great memories, from him breaking Tim Sylvia's arm to stopping Big Nog, like I said, by both strikes and submissions, and being the first guy to do both. He put on those 2 incredible fights with Brock Lesnar. Those were legendary, part of the legendary UFC 100 card. I love how he tooled Czech Congo, who's just a fighter that I just loathe. The list goes on. I'd say definitely Frank Mir is, regardless of the outcome of this fight, a future UFC Hall of Famer, and he's always been a company man. He's always had some great trash talking skills, which is I totally forgot to even mention that, since that's the name of this site. But Frank Mir, he loves to talk smack, and sometimes he's backed it up, and other times he hasn't. But I like it, man. He plays. He always believes in himself, win or lose, and he's a legend in the sport. So let's hope that Frank Mir, let's hope that he, at least if he does lose this fight, that he goes out on a great performance, and maybe he can win it and stay relevant. He's shocked us more than once in his career. He came back from an incredible motorcycle injury, and he won the belt after that again. So let's see what Frank Mir does, and we'll see how Bigfoot handles the adversity as well. So there you have it. That's my recap of the UFC Fight Night 60 and my preview of UFC Fight Night 61 coming up this Saturday. Hit me up on Twitter. You can get me at Trash Talk MMA. Check out the website, trashtalkmma.com. Give me a 5-star rating if you love the podcast. That really helps me reach a lot more viewers. And I'm probably going to be off the grid for a couple days. Got to take care of a few other things, but I'll definitely be back in time for the weekend. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Trash Talk MMA podcast. Be sure to visit trashtalkmma.com. And don't forget to follow Antoine on Twitter at Trash Talk MMA. Let us know you're listening. Use hashtag TrashTalkMMA.
Which I believe he was robbed in his loss in his previous fight to Donald Cerrone. So great to see him back in the win column and get a stoppage victory in his debut at welterweight. I don't think anyone expected that. And like I said, he made a lot of new fans, and it'll be interesting to see where he goes from there. If he drops down to lightweight or if he continues at welterweight, frankly, I'd like to see him continue at welterweight. It's just a breath of fresh air. Maybe he can put on some muscle, put on a bit of size, and we'll see the types of guys he can beat at that weight class. I mean, the guy's a damn good fighter. You really can't take that away from him. He's had a lot of decision wins at lightweight that people weren't too much a fan of, but I think losing a tough decision to Cerrone like that probably lit quite the fire under him to take the fight like he did on short notice in the first round. But Thatch never really poured it on to the same degree as he has in his 2 previous UFC contests. And Henderson was he was elusive and able to really weather whatever the initial first storm was brought to him. Thatch definitely pushed the pace. He was always advancing, always being aggressive, but never really came forward with the flurries that we've seen him come with before. And it was cool to see Henderson, when he won, acknowledge the size difference, and also that he was fighting at altitude, and that even despite his legendary cardio and legendary fitness level, that he went through quite a war. So bravo to Henderson. Great to see him get that type of victory after being a bit of a preview for UFC Fight Night 61 coming up this Saturday, which features a heavyweight main event between Antonio Bigfoot Silva and Frank Mir. So looking back at UFC Fight Night 60 from this past weekend, in the main event, Ben Henderson won his welterweight debut against a very tough and violent Brandon Thatch by rear naked choke in the 4th round. I think this fight saved the card. I think Ben Henderson saved the card. He's not always been in my good books. I don't think he's always been in everyone's good books. And I think he made a lot of new fans and a lot of new friends with the performance that he put on. He really fought like a champ. He was patient. He was tactical. He was actually outstriking Thatch.
Welcome to Trash Talk MMA, the #1 podcast for news and insight that matters in the world of mixed martial arts. Brought to you live and unfiltered from all 4 corners of the globe by MMA aficionado, Antoine Peltier.
Yo, welcome to the Trash Talk MMA podcast, episode 8. I'm your host, Antoine Peltier, coming to you live from Phuket, Thailand. Today's episode, we're going to talk about the results of UFC Fight Night 60 last weekend that featured a welterweight bout between Benson Henderson and Brandon Thatch. And from there, we will seg into on the feet. It was impressive to see how swollen up and bruised Thatch's eyes were, and just how methodical Benson Henderson was starting in round 2 of getting Thatch to the ground, going for submissions, not being able to get it, but refusing to lose at that game, get him back down in the 4th, and land a very, very impressive rear naked choke victory. Yeah, Ben Henderson looked great. Thatch came out strong in the first. I think a lot of people are talking about how Henderson survived an onslaught. I don't think Thatch really brought an onslaught like he has in his previous UFC fights that have all of his fights before this, except for one split decision loss, had ended with him winning by stoppage.